So that comes back to that notion of ultimately, if we're not going to have a form of barbarism where the rich continue to produce greenhouse gases with impunity and the poor, the people of Tuvalu, for instance, or the Carteret Islands continue to bear the brunt of those impacts, we will have to move to a rights-based approach based on fair shares. I don't see any other way of going about this unless we go down that path. So we use the model of environmental space with equity, and the model that I have seen that provides the best approach to this is probably a form of carbon rationing, and that would be where effectively you say how much carbon can we as a species put into the atmosphere on an annual basis. You divide, and on top of that, you might be able to increase that over time through carbon sequestration and other kind of ways of storing carbon. You divide that by the number of people on the planet. Australia, with a little bit over 20 million people, gets a share of the 6 billion. That is considered fair. And then you basically allocate that to us on an individual basis. And the model that's been used in England quite successfully is you divide it arbitrarily 40% to the general population, 60% to the manufacturing, industrial and agricultural sector. So when you buy, your cornflakes or whatever, there's actually already a carbon element included in that. And then the 40% becomes something that we then use when we pay for our electricity bills or we fill up petrol. If we choose to live frugally, we can then sell some of those credits on the market and actually make money. And if for whatever reason we feel the need to fly to Surfers Paradise every second weekend, then we'd need to buy some on the market. Now, the reason I think this model might work, and it's entirely fanciful at this point, of course, when the United States has already had a debate as long ago as 10 years ago in their federal Senate, and they said this would constitute green socialism, and we had the Cold War and we won against communism, so there's no way we'd go down this path. So I'm not underestimating the difficulty we would face in getting this up and running. But think about how climate change as an issue has profoundly shifted just in the last 2 years. There's a guy called Murray Hogarth who wrote a book. He was with the Sydney Morning Herald, I think, and then worked with ABC as an environmental reporter. He says that we had a national tipping point where suddenly more than 50% of Australians realised something had to give. That was only a couple of years ago. And think that we've just recently had the first federal election in our history where one of the things that got Rudd over the line was concern around leadership on climate change. So the terrain is moving incredibly quickly, and things that would have just been, fairies in the bottom of the garden type ideas a few years ago are going to become mainstream. And I think they're going to come mainstream quite quickly as global warming really bears down on us, and as more and more we feel it in the real world, rather than something that's an intellectual, thing we might think about. How much longer do I have? About 5 minutes. Okay. So what I'm arguing is the minority world has caused the problem, and we've done that through a legacy of colonialism, and that began with Christopher Columbus, of course, and it followed through to the settlement of Australia, where basically we came and we took what we wanted by gunpoint if need be. Basically, Europeans moved around the world, initially largely to trade rather than, to invade, but then over time, as local conflicts grew, armies were brought in. We all know the story of the East India Company, supported by the British Army over time, that led to colonialisation of individual countries. These local and often quite sustainable economies over time were broken. Countries were forged, often where they didn't exist before, or were split according to arbitrary lines, according to who the coloniser were. And that created the trade arrangements that we live in today. And it's very disingenuous, as I mentioned, people like Howard saying, China produces a lot of emissions on a gross basis rather than a per capita basis. I think it's equally disingenuous to say, yes, that was the past, colonialism was a long time ago, and we live in a new world now. Anyone who's done any reading, of course, on the free trade agreements knows that, in effect, that's a form of neo-colonialism that imposes particular trade arrangements, debt arrangements, privatisation agendas that are very neoliberal in their approach on southern nations. So we live in a world not very far removed from the legacy of colonialism. It's played out differently. It's not played out anymore through English troops in red jackets with muskets or anything, but it is played out through the political arrangements we have, the relationships between nation states, and particularly the free trade agreements. So if I'm saying we need to go to a fair share model, we actually have to deal with that legacy. the legacy of the trade agreements and the nature of the integration that's occurring around the world, which means by definition climate change isn't a technological issue. It can't just be around geosequestration or clean coal. It can't just be about technological innovation or better insulation or higher star ratings on our appliances. It's inherently a political argument, and I think there's a danger, as I mentioned before, as issues become mainstream they lose their political edge in order to be palatable to everyone. This needs to be palatable to Rio Tinto and BHP and to Coles Myer and to Xstrata as much as it has to be palatable to the people of Tuvalu.